It's the journey, not the destination. This journey is about the process of learning, growing, helping, and waking up to who we are along the way. Let's explore the means, methods, tools, and examples of living on purpose, living the life we want, and doing the things that light us up. I'm your host, Carlo Sanfilippo, and welcome to It's the Journey. Hello, everybody, and welcome back to It's the Journey. I'm your host, Carlo Sanfilippo, and today I'm super duper excited to bring guest Barbara Ginty. Barbara is a CFP and has an amazing podcast called Future Rich Podcast. And for those of you who have been listening or read any of the things I've written, you know that planning has been an important part of me figuring out how to do the things I wanted to do once I figured out what I wanted to do. And so I wanted to just jump in and have a conversation with Barbara about some fun planning things. So Barbara, thank you so much for joining me today.
Thank you for having me. It's been exciting to watch your journey from afar and been quite inspiring.
Oh, thank you. Thank you. I was thinking back as I was prepping for this about our connection, and we met 6-ish years ago at a conference,
Mhm.
and it struck me how you're and people when they listen to your podcast, they'll say you're very detail oriented and very intelligent and very you're very structured with what you do.
Mhm.
And a lot of times some of the people like that I've met, and they're not always open to like different ways of looking at things or doing things. And it struck me how even at that point you had met me, I was either just getting ready to, or I just come back from Italy, and I was beginning to change the way I dressed, and I grew a beard and doing these different things, which I used to get a lot of really weird looks when I would go to conferences after I stopped looking like everybody else.
Well, in finance, I know like my mentor also grew a beard, and he said to me, he was like, I did this to be different. And it is true that facial hair, it's not like a written rule, but it's just really not something you see in
Yes.
finance.
Yes.
Everybody's clean shaven. You don't see tattoos. It's a very specific look and dress when you work in finance. I've always worked in finance, and so even
Yeah.
my sister, who worked in music at the time, was like getting her nails painted blue, and she's like, "You should do that." I was like, I can't." She's like, "They have nail color rules." I was like, "Well, not." They haven't explicitly said that I can't have blue nails, but I'm pretty sure it won't go over well. So I'm going to stick with like neutral colors.
Yeah.
So yeah, beard for men is like, it was like,
I
you
may as
catch the
well have
people
a
off
face
guard.
tattoos.
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. It's shocking, but it's true.
Well, the fun part of it was, I think you have to reach a certain point in your career where you can do that.
Where you
Uh,
don't care, where you're just like, I'm going to do what I want to do, and I'm over the opinion of everybody else.
well, and that you can be okay if some people don't work with you. Like
Mm,
I,
yes.
when I was pretty young, I met a guy that this multi millionaire that was in real estate, and he kind of had a hippie look to him and wore jeans. And he said, I first started, I'd have to put on when I went to the bank, I'd have to put on a suit and really put on a
Mhm.
dog and pony. And now I go with jeans and a t-shirt, and they're begging to give me more money. And it's like, you just, you have to get to a certain point where you can, and maybe you don't care if
There's ramifications to it.
right.
Right.
But oddly, then it attracts different people to you
Hmm.
that want someone that's different or something or whatever it might be. But yeah, right away, like,
Absolutely.
yeah, you were curious and kept
I was
asking me,
curious.
yeah. Well, you kept
Yeah, we
asking
sat
me,
next to each other.
yeah, and oh yeah, you kept asking me questions, and I got to the point where I wasn't talking with a lot of people about what I was doing because you know, I was I knew that it wasn't maybe accepted, or people didn't understand it, or because it was different they didn't care. But you obviously you're curious, and it was so fun that like a year later you're doing your own version of that. You're like, oh yeah, I rented a cabin and I skied all month in between. I did all my work and then I skied, and I just was thought that was so awesome and amazing, and I was just so excited for you just jumping in and doing your version to live your dreams.
Yeah, and so for the listeners, so I sat next to Carlo at a conference and they were like having us do goal planning, I think, of like your business goals. And so I had like them all mapped out and you were like, "Where are your personal goals?" And I was like, "Personal goals? I didn't know we had personal goals. I thought we just had goals and growth goals." And you were like, "Well, I just got back from Italy." And I was like, "Well, that sounds incredible." And you were like, "Why don't you put down some personal goals?" And I was like completely flabbergasted. I was like very confused, but very and I am a curious person and I love meeting. I think the reason I like this industry is I love meeting new people. And so this was great because I never expected to sit next to somebody who'd like just gotten back to Italy and was like focused on personal goals. And so I'm very lucky that I sat next to you because if I had sat next to somebody who's so work focused, I would have just continued. I don't think I would have ever thought differently. And so you were like, okay, why don't you just like write down something that you would like to do that isn't work? I'm surprised we didn't get in trouble for talking too much. And so I was like, okay. And you're like, whatever it might like, what do you like to do? And I was like, I'm not sure. And so then I was like, I really like to ski. And you're like, okay, like maybe that should be a goal. And so I did. I was like, I would love to ski more than, 48 hours, like Saturday and Sunday when the rest of the world is also trying to ski and like leave super late Friday night and then get back on Monday morning. And you like have to get up early and get all the gear rent. It's like so
Yeah.
hectic. And so there was like a few other things happening in my life. So it was just very serendipitous for me to sit next to you. And so I came up with all these personal goals, which is great to write those down, just like you write down your financial goals and your work goals and all the things. Cause you were like, you can have all of these. And I was like, okay. And then I did it. And then, yeah, the next year I left New York City and I rented a house I ended up extending, but I rented a house out of the gate for 8 weeks
That's
so that I
amazing.
could do my work. But the goal was to ski. And I think I skied like 65 days that year.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah, it was incredible. It was
Well,
great. I was like, I need to have more personal goals.
yeah. Well, I had learned started figuring out some of that when I did that strategic coach program,
Hmm.
and what they said was, the more you spend time doing what you're super passionate about and excited about, one, you'll recharge and you'll come back to the business better.
Yeah.
And two, it's going to make you more attractive to your clients because they ultimately that's what people want. I mean, everyone may love or like their career in a different way, or maybe they don't love it at all and they really just want to be free. So that's attractive to people to see, oh, this person's got this figured out. They go skiing for weeks at a time, not once a year until their knees
For a
can't handle
weekend.
it anymore. Right.
Yeah.
Like, I mean, how many people they do something, they just get one injury and then all of a sudden you're not doing your passion anymore.
Hmm.
So that makes me so excited to hear. And that's just another reason why it's so important to follow your dreams, like to
Yeah.
live your life, because you don't know whose life that'll impact, whether it's someone or just someone like if we had never spoken again, you were doing all these fun things, and who knows who else has been influenced by what you're doing now. That's amazing.
Yeah, absolutely. And I agree. I thought so when I did it, I always run things by my dad, and my dad was like, "Well, it's not going to be good for the business, blah blah blah," which is interesting because like this man did not get a real job for a long time. So I thought it was a little ironic. I was like, "Dad, I worked all of my 20s and, most of my 30s or at the time I think it was 4 years ago. Yeah, so I was still in my early 30s. And so I was like, that's okay. I'm comfortable with the revenue hit for the company so that I get a personal thing. And
Hmm.
so I'm okay with that. And ironically, as you pointed out, you do actually get to recharge and then you're more engaged versus like being at the office at 8 o'clock, being like, I don't want to be here. This sucks. And you're
Yeah.
not really as productive. And so the business actually hit the highest revenue it's ever hit since I've made these where I prioritize personal choices.
Yeah. Well, I saw that the last 5 years I worked, um, every year the business grew, and I worked. By the end, I was averaging 20 hours a week.
It's
And,
amazing.
and that's when I was even when I was in town. I mean, I worked really hard to make that happen, and used tech and systems and all that kind of stuff. But the more I realized, the more time I spent engaging on what really lit me up, then I
Hmm.
could be better at what I was doing. And then all of a sudden, I was getting referrals from my clients because they thought I was living an interesting life, and people were hiring me not just to manage their money because they wanted to understand, well, how do I do that? How do
How
I
can I do? Yeah, I feel
Yeah,
like I get that a lot. You've kind of attract, you put out that energy and you kind of get it back. And I definitely feel like I talk to more people now. I have a lot of skiers in my life professionally. And then you get other people who are like, I would like to get to a point where I have that flexibility and I can also prioritize personal goals over maybe professional because I've just focused so much on professional. So it does really attract those people back in to your life.
for sure. And then just from a, I don't know, a selfish, maybe personal satisfaction standpoint, then you are working with people that you have a lot of things in common with, which makes for deeper relationships. It's like they you have
Absolutely.
something they want, but then you're also connected with them on a level that's beautiful and fun and makes life short. Like you should
Life is
like
short. And I
like
I will say after we sat down, we were at the conference together, and I think I feel like it just worked out in my favor. Sometimes I get lucky, but I think that one of the other speakers there is Jesse Itzler. He does speaking at conferences, Sarah Blakely's husband. And his talk, I won't give it all away, but one of the things he mentioned was if you think about life from a different perspective, which is you only get like, so I obviously love winter. Some people love summer. I love ski season. So he said, like, okay, you're 35. How many ski seasons do you have left?
yeah,
And, I would say I have clients that are skiing pretty well into their 60s. It's like, it feels like depends at your 70s, you get a little slower, a little bit more cautious. So from 35, let's say to 65, you have 30 ski seasons left.
yeah, yeah,
And so you
and
act differently from that perspective.
for sure. Well, and then something like COVID comes along, and
Mm-hmm.
none of us did a lot of things for a couple years. Like
Yeah.
I had another trip to Italy planned for 2020 that got canceled, and it was with my extended family, and so that still hasn't happened. We're trying to do it next year, but that you never know when something comes, something, an emergency or sickness
Yep.
or a global pandemic. Like you don't
Yeah,
know.
I haven't left the country and I used to try and go even if it was for a long weekend, leave the country once a year, just some even if it's like fly to Colombia for a long weekend, something just to get out, experience another culture, even if it's 4 days.
Uh,
But I haven't left the country since September of 2019.
yeah, right. And then from a time
Be-
standpoint, that feels like it was like 18 months ago. Like,
I know.
right, because like so many crazy things happened
Hmm.
in all of our lives, collectively and then individually, and however we dealt with that, plus whatever else is happening, that it just kind of warped our, a lot of people's, for me, for sure, my sense of what that time actually was. So yeah, no, it just makes me so excited when I hear those stories about something somebody did, because I finally had the courage to do something. I mean, the things I'm doing now are what I wanted to do when I was 17. I think I told someone recently that one time when I was in first grade, a friend of mine was at his house, and he said, "What are you going to be when you grow up?" And I had like thought out in my Carlo brain like a very rational plan. Like I wanted to travel and I wanted to see as much as I could, and I didn't have any money, so I'm like, I'm going to be a truck driver, so I get paid to go see everything. And my friend laughed at me and was like, "That's dumb, and you should go to college or whatever." But so then I start thinking of other ways of, well, and then later it was international business and all these kind of things. But like, I knew at a young age I had this drive to go see things. So I was like trying to figure out how to do it. And then that's ultimately because of my problem solver brain, I was drawn to planning. And
Very similar. Also did international business because wanted to see the
yeah,
world, which doesn't the degree doesn't necessarily correlate with the travel,
exactly.
but
Right, right. Well, then, I started a family young age, and I'm like, well, I don't want to miss my kids' childhood because I'm on a plane all the time, so
hmm.
I put that aside for a couple decades, and now I'm finally doing it. But it's just so exciting when we can find the courage to do what we really want to do and give ourselves permission. As soon as you give yourself permission, like you were saying, like, there's other people in our lives that are start telling you why it may be not a great idea or may not be the wisest thing, whether it's your dad or it's well-meaning advice and
Mhm.
practical advice. But I've talked about this before where sometimes it's well-meaning advice and sometimes it's that person's fear. They don't want you to make a mistake or it's something that they would be scared to do. So then they're going to express that fear out loud to you.
Or if it's something that they've never done. So I've heard a lot of things in my life. So I bought the business when I was 28, and as you know, with a brick and mortar business, the idea is you live relatively near. So I was like, well, I'm not going to live there. I'm keeping my apartment in Manhattan.
Mm-hmm.
So right out of the gate, everybody I met in the industry was like, well, that's not how this works. Like you're going to fail. Like, you can't do that. So I always just try not to listen, because I think that when you take the path less traveled, you garner a lot of not intentionally negative feedback, but just you're doing something that the other 90% isn't. And so they're
Mm-hmm.
just going to warn you because they didn't take that path. They took the path everyone else took. So they're like, do not go down there. It's scary. It's bad. You're going to fail. They're trying to help you. I think their intentions behind it, I don't think it's malicious. I think
For
they're well
sure.
intentioned. But I do think that when you do something differently, but what you're doing is off the beaten path, I would say you don't see it that often. I think after meeting, I was already on an off the beaten path, and I met you, and I was like, I'm going to keep going this way
Yay.
farther.
Yeah.
Um, so I just think you garner a lot of, because I never did it or I didn't see how it worked for my life. Let me tell you why I don't think it's going to work for you. But I just try not to listen to those people because they lived a very traditional. A lot of the feedback I get where it's not going to work is from a very traditional mindset, which is
Yeah.
fine, but that's not what I'm trying to do.
Yeah. What was that old saying? Like, if you do what everyone else is doing, you'll get what everyone else has, like,
Correct.
like,
Yes,
so,
correct.
and so, yeah, the average person's not doing it. So, and that's it again, like whether it's whatever your field is, there's 8 billion people on the planet. So if
Hmm.
you figure out how to design and live the way you want, and if that involves a business of some sort, there's probably thousands, if not millions, of people that want that would be drawn to that. Um, and so it hopefully gives people some little reinsurance, like to think about and have the courage to live the life the way they want.
Totally. And I read an interesting quote, and I think about this often because as you like your life changes, sometimes you're like always wanting, at least for me, I'm always like, what's the next step? What do we? And there was a quote saying, what you have is what someone's praying for,
Mm-hmm.
which
Yeah.
I just think like really can ground you to be like, and also it's probably like I look back on my vision board and it is sometimes shocking to be like, wow, like I'm on my third or fourth vision board. Like I've gotten everywhere and just trying to enjoy where you are in the moment and then not listen to some of the well intentioned naysayers out there,
Yeah.
but then really how much you can progress with building and designing a life that might be different than most people, but will work for you. And you just don't know there's other people that would be praying to get to that level where you are.
Absolutely. And this, I didn't mean this to be a relationship conversation, but I think that it's appropriate here. Like when you are, whether it's your deepest personal relationships or friendships, the more closely you live in a way that's in alignment with who you really, really are, you'll attract, and earlier I mentioned clients, but you'll also attract people into your personal life that
Mm.
align with that you wouldn't have met if you weren't living in a true way. And I experienced that firsthand, that when there's one of my chapters called Building Your Tribe, and how when I started really diving into things that lit me up, that made me happy, I've met scores of people now who are a part of my everyday life that I wouldn't have met before because we wouldn't have had anything in common.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and then you look at, with the divorce rate the way it is in this country, I think a lot of it has to do with true people that are unconscious about who they are and what they want. And enough things line up with, well, hey, we're this age and we want to have kids. And you
before
know?
this age. And
Right.
yeah, there's
And
a lot
so
of societal pressure.
yeah. Besides all the pressure of like when we're gonna have grandkids, whatever, and then you don't know really who you are, what you want, and you're living the way you think you're supposed to, and then pretty soon you're like, you wake up one day and you're like, what am I doing? Why? When you're miserable. So, living the way you want will attract people into your life that align with that and make it hopefully more likely that you have successful relationships.
Yeah, I absolutely believe in that. I mean, my life is such a world of a difference since I decided to buy a place in Utah and spend ski season out west, which I've now done successfully for 19, 20, 21, 22, 23. My fifth. I go by ski seasons now. Like teachers go by summer vacation. I now live by ski season. So
That's awesome.
I just completed my fifth ski season. But yeah, you get different people, you attract different people. Like that energy that you're putting out is very different. And so, yeah, I totally agree. I think it's changed some personal relationships, but definitely with clients and stuff. I mean, I think it affects your overall, all your relationships in your life. And I do believe when you're living the life that you want, and it's not perfect every day, right? Sometimes it's not great, but generally speaking, I do think it's just like such a, it feels like you're on the right vibration, if that makes sense. Like
Hmm.
everything's aligned and it goes so much smoother. And then you get better people, not better people, you get people that are more aligned with you coming into your life. So, yeah,
Yeah.
highly recommend.
It makes decisions easier because you're
Yes,
moving towards what you want versus away from something else, or you're excited about the things you're doing. You're doing things you want to do versus the whole have to do.
have to
Um,
do.
yeah, that's so critical. Well, I want to touch back on your podcast for people because I've
Sure.
I've avoided I've kept my podcast more broad
Okay.
of like how to what are tools and things people can use to live the life they want. And I've talked about planning, but I've not, and I don't want to dive into the weeds of like anything technical today, but just
We're not going to do percentages.
gosh, no spreadsheets, I
Okay.
promise.
Okay.
Uh, but
Okay.
but more like I want to get, and I love one of my favorite things is bringing on outside experts, whether it's therapists or coaches or people that have done things. Because I'm not trying to set up a coaching business. I'm not trying to be a guru. I'm not trying to be a know-it-all. I just want to like give people more tools and resources so they can
Hmm.
live the life they want. And I've tried to harp on this because I don't think enough people do planning and they don't really even understand what it is. Um, and so one of the things, one was the quote, a goal without a plan is just a wish. And
100%.
yeah, and so I think everybody should have some degree of financial literacy
Hmm.
and have a plan and understand that a plan is not a product or a document because you know that people you meet someone and like, oh, I have a plan, which means they have insurance and a portfolio and maybe a will. That's not a plan. Those are components of a plan. Those are tools. Um, so I wanted to, first of all, tell people, your podcast has what, over 200 episodes. And I tell people like, get some level of financial literacy. And again, I don't want to talk about finance anymore. So listen to Future Risk podcast and it'll start giving you some of that vocabulary and tools and understanding
Hmm.
to help you so that when you do work with a planner, you've got a better background. But with your experience, when I've been, I've gotten in the habit of asking coaches like what they're excited about, what they're working on. One thing I was thinking about with you is, what's your favorite, maybe insight, habit, or aha moment that you've had with people that you wish you could get more people to more quickly?
Okay, so I probably would say it was a tie for me. So the podcast I interview women, it's for women by women because I just think, and I'm sure you probably saw, there's not a lot of women in personal finance or in
Yeah.
finance in general. Personal finance is, I think, actually maybe worse than institutional. And so we do that to improve financial literacy amongst women and empower them to take control of their finances because it can change the entire trajectory of your life. But two things that I think I see, one's like a very tangible mistake. I think that most people are overspending on housing.
Hmm.
And because of the housing, we are unable to achieve or get to other life goals that we're working towards because we're just using too much towards housing. That's one that I've personally like just watched so many times that I'm super disciplined on keeping my housing costs incredibly low.
Uh-huh.
My housing cost has been the same amount of money for since 2012.
Awesome.
So I'm yeah, and then but it's been pretty comparable since I was 22. Like the variation is like nominal.
Wow.
Just because I think it allows you to just get, for instance, I would not have been able to do Utah had I had a really nice apartment. And I had a great apartment in Manhattan. But if I had continued to increase my housing and increase the luxuries of that, like everybody else I saw doing before I got into personal finance, I wouldn't have had the wherewithal to pay my Manhattan rent and rent a rental in Utah. But my housing cost has always been so affordable that it's given me so much bandwidth to do other things. And so to me, that's like a really easy one, just to like always, to me, that's not important. Like I live very, like my house, I love it. It's beautiful that I own. It's the same price as my Manhattan rental that I got in 2012, the
Uh-huh.
mortgage, same thing. So I've
Awesome.
always just done it to allow for other things because that's something that I've always seen because like once you're in that housing thing where you're overspending, it's a lease usually, or it's a mortgage. Very hard to fix those.
Mm-hmm.
Not an
Mm-hmm.
easy, like, okay, we're going to cut that down next month. Nope. You have a 12-month lease, or you got a mortgage that now allows you to spend money on nothing else but the house.
Right.
So that's like a really big thing that I see that, in my opinion, impairs other goals because you didn't intentionally think about it. You just were like, well, we have to have the doorman or we need the gym. And it's
Yeah.
like, okay, well, do you like that more than vacation?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So that's one big one. And then the second one I would say, and this is an easier fix, is a lot of people don't intentionally budget their money because they don't like the word budget.
Mm-hmm.
So when you finally sit down and analyze what do you have coming in and what are you going having out, I normally find the biggest issue being housing, but that's not the case for everybody. But just having an understanding of what you're making and where it's going, and is where is it going, which is kind of aligned with what I just said, serving what your overall goals are.
Okay.
It's generally a no.
Right.
Generally, people are like, I had no idea I was spending that much money on eating out. And yeah, so I think it's important to save for your financial goals first. I call it budgeting backwards. So like sit down at the beginning of the year or the beginning of the month, however you want to do it, and say, like for me, if we use me as an example, I was like, I want to pay for an 8-week rental in Utah and get new ski gear. So what does that look like and what do I have to save? And so that was like just like you pay your taxes, they don't ask you like at the end of the month, like, hey, do you have enough for your federal taxes and your state taxes and your Medicare? No, it comes out first and you live on what's left.
Right.
That's how you should do your financial goals, in my opinion. Put that money aside for what your goals are and then live on what's left.
Those are great. And that's the housing thing is something I've spent a lot of time talking about with people because I see there, even the way we think about not only housing, but a lot of things in the American dream lifestyle is
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
this idea of a starter home, because when you make more money, you should always upgrade, because how else will everybody know you're successful? And then whether you're upgrading the actual house or not, then you're serial remodeling, because you can't show people your balance sheet. You have to show them your new granite countertops and the new cabinets. And, oh, what did you do? Oh, we did this to the bathroom and this and that. So I got trapped in that for a while when I was married, of like, I bought this old house and it wasn't even that big, but it had 50 years of deferred maintenance. And
Mm-hmm.
every time there was extra money, it went into the house. And then on top of, because everything was so expensive, I ended up just doing a lot of the work myself because, well, I can
So there go
remodel the,
your weekends.
yeah, yeah, I can remodel the kitchen or the bathroom for 10,000, and it would cost 40,000 to have it done, you know? So
Mm-hmm.
yeah, I lost thousands of hours of life, and
Mm-hmm.
I don't want to know how much money on the house. But then when I restructured my life, I restructured to a simpler home, and it's a condo versus a house. So I don't have a yard. I've saved thousands of hours of not mowing and raking and cleaning gutters, plus all the things I don't have to own, lawnmowers and all that kind of
Oh my
stuff.
gosh.
Right. I, and that's because I would get people sometimes asking me, well, how do you have time to learn Italian? How do you have time to do this? I'm like,
You're
because
like,
I'm
I
not,
don't mow a lawn.
yeah, I'm not a gardener anymore. Do you
Yeah.
like mowing grass? Well, no, but everybody, no. There you go. um,
Yeah, I definitely think a lot of people get caught up in upgrading their lifestyle. And I also think that there's a lot of pressure to own a home, and I'm not a believer that that's the right choice for everybody.
mhm.
I heard a really good quote from Ramit, I forget his last name, and he said a mortgage is the minimum you're spending it for the month, and rent is the maximum.
Yes.
And it's really true. And I do think that like on TikTok and social, owning real estate, they make it out to be very glamorous. Yeah, it can go really smoothly for some people. It is knock on smooth. I own two properties, and let me tell you, I know more about sewage lines than I've ever cared to know. And I have
Right.
never wanted to put $20,000 into a hole in the ground, because that is literally, it's like
Yes.
a boat, except
Yeah.
you don't ever get to see underneath the pavement again when you
Right.
dump 20,000 into a hole
Right.
in the ground. And everyone who's listened to my podcast knows that that was like the most painful way to spend money, in my opinion, was to put a band-aid on a sewage line for like, and I got a discount of like the tune of like 20, I don't even remember. It was somewhere between 20 and 30,000. But so a lot of people get caught up in like, well, we have to buy a home. We have to buy it. No, you don't. There's nothing wrong with renting. I do think that long term, over 30 to 40 years, you have to be careful that you don't get pushed out of your community because of increasing rent costs.
Hmm.
But there shouldn't be a rush, in my opinion. You don't want to do it before you're financially ready. And a lot of people do. And then their sewage line goes when they haven't saved enough money for the down payment. So they don't have a lot of equity in the home. They don't have 20 grand sitting around for a new sewage line, because sewage lines are expensive,
Yes.
and you can't verify if it's good or not. They can put a camera down for the tune of 1,500, but if you don't happen to do that when you buy your home, it's not like you can see the roof. Like, you can see the roof, so then that ends up on a credit card, and then it just starts to snowball, in my opinion.
Well, absolutely. And I heard you on one of your episodes talking about sinking funds, and that's something I tried to drill in people's
Mm-hmm.
head because I had a lot of business owner clients that taught me that. And when you buy whatever you buy, and I've talked about this on here before, but like houses and cars, they're all slowly uh, succumbing to entropy.
Yes.
Like if you have a car, it's going to need tires. It's going to need everything's going to need fixed or repaired or replaced.
Yes. Well,
And yeah, no
and
one.
this isn't a popular opinion, especially as a CFP. I lease. I have no desire to know how anything in that car works. I have
Hmm.
no idea. I am completely clue. I'm
Right.
the people at the car place. I drove over one time and I was like, "There's this light. I think it's overheating." And the guy was like, "No, that light's always there." And I was like, "Oh, I just noticed it. Do you know how to work at CarPlay while I'm here?" So like, you're all everyone's smart in their own arena.
For
I
sure.
as dumb as it can be when it comes to cars. So I don't ever want to own a car. I don't want to know anything about it. I want to drive it and I want to return it to you before there's any problem with it. I want to own nothing for a car, no things.
Yeah.
I don't want any things. And so people are like, "Well, isn't it better to own?" I was like, "Maybe. For me, it's not. I
Yeah.
want nothing to do with this."
Yeah. No, no. And it's good to know that. Like, well, what do I want to spend my time and energy on? And that frees up your mental energy so you're not thinking about, should I spend this money on this car or just get a different one, and blah 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 blah. So yeah, just yeah. So that
And
yeah.
there's just so much maintenance for that stuff. And so everyone has to just make, I think, their personal decision of like, my husband owns his car. Apparently he enjoys doing oil changes because he does all of this stuff himself. I want
Yeah,
nothing to do
which
with
is
that,
rare. Yeah.
which is rare, climbing under the car to do it. But he doesn't seem to phase him. So he'll probably always own a car. I will always lease it and have no idea what's happening with it and just
Right.
turn it back in after I've driven only 10,000 miles or something. But
Exactly.
everyone has to choose and not always. So like obviously financially sometimes buying is better, but I think you also then have to make that determination like you said, I don't want to spend any time working on it or fixing it. So to me, I'm saving money on my overall housing costs and then I just lease and don't really worry. As long as that's within my budget, I am happy to not have a time suck on that.
Hmm.
Because with the sinking fund, you also have to remember the time that's being invested for those decisions.
Exactly. And that ties really closely with what the other thing you're talking about with budgeting and why
Mm-hmm.
that's so critical. Because I used to tell people that money is like water, and if you don't channel it, it's like it'll just like dumping water on a piece of concrete. It just dissipates and goes away, and people get excited when a bill goes. Like I just paid off my car, so I have an extra $400 a month. I'm like, but if you
Mm-mm.
don't capture that, you won't even know where it's gone. It'll
Yeah,
just
you need to
disappear.
save that for the next car because
Mm-hmm.
yeah,
Yeah.
and water goes wherever it wants, right? So
Right.
if there's not a path for water, water will create a path,
Yeah.
as
And,
we
and then
know.
it's gone. It's
Yeah.
gone. So I finally figured that with the last car payment I had, when I paid it off, I don't remember how many years ago it was. I kept making the car payment to myself
Hmm.
till I
Yep.
had enough money that then I could always just pay cash for a car. Um, Ultimately, though, what I did was I built it to the point where then that piece of my portfolio paid my car expense.
Amazing.
So I built it up like that piece of my
Much.
portfolio is for a car. And so I won't have a car payment again as long as I manage that money properly. So that's what I did
That's
to like
amazing.
in my brain get rid, because that's ultimately what you do with financial freedom is you get enough
Yep.
streams of income to where then you don't need to work if you don't want to do that. Um, but going back to the budgeting, why that's
Hmm.
you said two things that were super critical. One is like knowing where your money's going, but also you
Hmm.
got to know why. Like you mentioned, if I want to go skiing, if I want to do this and that, and I think so many people, I was this way. I had buried my dreams so deeply because I didn't ever think I'd be able to do the things I'm doing now. That I became very unconscious with my money because the things I really wanted to do, I didn't think I could.
Hmm.
And so when my life shifted the last decade and I became very crystal clear of like, oh, I want to streamline my life. I want to be able to travel more. I want to be able to do this and this and this. Then my brain started working for looking for solutions. I can use this technology to replace this. I can save this money here. I can get rid of these subscriptions, whatever it might be. But I that budgeting piece of what you're doing is so important. But people digging into, and that might be therapy, like like
Yeah, because like what you just said is like, I'm getting rid of these subscriptions. A lot of people look at that as sacrifice. And the way I look at it is, well, let's just use an example. Like you're going to get rid of, which Hulu wouldn't make a big enough difference, but I'm going to get rid of dining out on a regular basis. It's going to be once a week sort of thing because I'm spending 400 a week on restaurants. It's not a sacrifice if it's actually getting you what you want. So if you sat down with either of us and said, dining out is my priority. Every week I want to go to 4 restaurants. That brings me joy. I love, like, I want to do a food blog. And so it's important to be at all the restaurants. And that's great. When it's happening unconsciously and you're just doing it because you're exhausted at the end of the day because you hate your job and your colleagues and dining out just makes you feel better about your life, but you really want to be traveling, but by the time you dine out every single night of the week, you actually have no money for vacation. It's just this like sick cycle that you're in. And
mm-hmm,
so it's not really always a sacrifice to allocate your money differently. I just think you get into these habits based on where you currently are. And so I think I'm a big believer that you have to live for today and plan for tomorrow
mm-hmm,
because tomorrow's not promised. And so, but you have to have a fine balance so that you can do both well. And I think being very clear on what your goals are and what you want out of your life is the first step to then figuring out where your money should be going.
right. I did a episode earlier this year with a woman who is a coach, Julie Bowl, and helps people really. She was trained by Dr. Brene Brown, and does a
Yep.
lot of like value-based
Hmm.
teaching and coaching. And um, when you know your values in life, it helps you prioritize better. And
Yes.
like, so like years ago, I was, when one of my sons started it, we didn't like the public school for him. So we found a
Hmm.
school that worked better for him. And I worked with someone, and just because we were close, I knew that we made virtually the same amount of money.
Okay.
And one day he's like, "Oh yeah, that's really great that you could do that. We really wish we could send our kids to that school." Um, and I knew, like, their house was twice as expensive as mine, and they had a country club membership that was $2,000 a month. And I'm like, dude, like, you absolutely could.
We could. Yeah.
Yeah, I've had people say, "Oh, I wish we could take our kids to Europe." Like, I know
We
you live
can.
in, you can, you've got a mortgage that's 600,000 or whatever it is. You know, like,
Yeah.
it's a choice. Uh,
I think people forget that, especially when they're in the mindset of like keeping up with that American dream, because that American dream looks differently for everybody. And like keeping up with that, the mentality of keeping up with the Joneses. And so you get, as I said, like the housing, the thing to me, why that's so problematic is once you're in it, it's such a severe change to get out of it usually.
mhm.
And it's
Ha-
financial to get out of it
Yeah.
often.
Have you? I want to get back to you mentioned your podcast is, you interview women, female guests, and that's the focus. But I want to get back to that in a second, because I just do. But have you had any success or luck with helping people make a shift of, like, you don't have to keep up with the Joneses. You don't.
Yeah, I would say that. So I bought the business 10 years ago, and I would say that my clients, which I'm really thankful for, and I say this when people start in my office, I'm like, you're not going to, how they look and act is going to be very different than what you expect for millionaires.
Yeah. Yeah.
They're
Yeah.
regular people that have made very conscious decisions for saving and spending their money intentionally to get to whatever the desire is. And it's very different for everybody. Like we have one client that like takes the whole family on these like really amazing vacations, and she pays for tickets for everybody, and like it's like what she lives to do, and that's basically where we spend all of her money. Like she lives pretty frugally except for these like, when I say extravagant, like she'll take like $70,000 out for a vacation.
Wow. Wow.
I mean,
That's
she's
amazing.
like flying people like all over the country.
Good gosh.
She pays for like everything. Um, and then if you saw her, you wouldn't know that
That
she
was
does
even
these like,
possible.
yeah, and that's with a lot of us. And so I think with a lot of the people we work with, and I think that's been really wonderful to see. I also think I was really lucky to buy the business at 28 to see how all of the clients had saved and how they were spending it, because we've just kind of like learned by how it already been set up. But like for instance, that idea of like live for today but plan for tomorrow. So like using all the company's stock to buy a boat that now does like, I think it's referred to as the grandfather cruise, and it's been going on for
Awesome.
like 15 years. And so I really, it's been pretty amazing to see, because I would say our client base has not intentionally done like kept up with the Joneses. They're like very practical, very good savers. um and it allowed a lot of our clients, which has been very rewarding to see. Some of our clients have been with us over 30 years, to see how it starts and how it ends up, because it's pretty incredible. Like I just did a planning meeting last night. Yeah, well, last night. And going to be retiring at, was it, I'm trying to remember the age. I think 60, with like full pension, full health care. They already purchased the house where they're moving to. They're going to sell. They're like so excited. We're like 12
Awesome.
months out, and they're like not going to have a financial worry. If anything, I think they're going to end up bringing in more money than when they're in retirement. They're like so excited,
Yeah. No, that's
which is
so.
incredible.
Yeah. Well, that thing you mentioned, that was my favorite part about my career. Is I love history, I love biographies, and I felt like every family I got to work with was a new biography. and I got to
Mhm.
see a lifetime of choices and examples. And then at the beginning of my career,
Yes.
I was seeing it. Okay, this person did this and this and this, and they tell me how they started a business, or their dad or grandpa or whatever,
Mhm.
um, and that where that led them to where they are now. But then, like you said, over the course of your career, you get to see continual outcomes
Yeah,
and decisions.
I I think one of the most interesting things about this profession is all the data points that you get. So I would say on average, I do 150 to 250 meetings per year, right, with
Wow.
individuals.
Yeah.
Yeah, so like this month I'm doing in the next 6 weeks I'll be doing 50 to 60 in-person meetings.
Oh
So if
my
we
gosh.
just I know it's busy. We're going to be changing that in the future. It's like personal goal, but so let's just assume yeah, so 50 in a month. So I don't do it. So let's say 60 years. So, okay, let's say I do 300 meetings a year. So times 10 years. So that's at least 3,000 people. But I've had over 2,000 people take my classes in person.
Wow.
So I think that I've met with or talked to around 5,000 people in just 10 years, just this, not institutional. And what I've seen, and this is where I get those data points that housing, so the people that have been very successful, the housing cost is always super low. So
Uh-huh.
it's not whatever that rule, which I don't use, is it 20, 30, 50?
Yeah. Yeah.
And
I
like
don't
the
know.
way I think it's 20, 30, 50. And then with mortgage brokers, like what they calculate is what you can afford. Never use that. Nobody who's ever successfully designed a life that they love use that rule.
Yes. Yeah. Well, mortgage brokers they get paid, and not that there's no, if anyone's listening that is a mortgage broker, not bad, but that's how they're paid, based on the size of the mortgage you take out.
Yeah. And
And
you probably, yeah, technically you can afford it
yeah,
if your priority is housing, if that's
right.
your number one thing you're living and breathing by. It's not always. And yes, in the beginning, you want to buy a little bit more house, maybe because your family's gonna expand or whatever. You don't want to have to keep upgrading. But most of our clients, and you probably saw this too, one house.
Yes. No, absolutely. Yeah. And that book, Millionaire Next Door, when I read
Yes.
that, described
It's
my
like Warren
clients.
Buffett, same house.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that's so important. Yeah. And it's not to make anyone feel bad about the house that they have, but being conscious about, is this keeping me from achieving anything else that I want to have in my life?
Yes,
And
exactly.
the solution might be, if you work in an industry, that's what I liked about, you know, my old career and your current career, is like, you could figure out of like, oh, well, if I just get this many more clients, then I can make more money. Well, not everybody can do that. So
Right.
it might mean, if you're in a career that's got a very, cost of living type thing, then maybe you may make a decision about different housing if you're going
Mm-hmm.
to achieve your goals. So that, and then yeah, being conscious with your budgeting, and is so critical to capturing your money and making sure you're planning for sewer lines and all those kind of things that
All
might
the fun
happen.
things that you
Yeah,
want to
yeah,
spend your money on. Yeah. Like roofs, hot water heaters.
exactly. Yeah, when your friends come over, you're like, look at my sewer line. It's like,
Yeah, it's beautiful.
it's yeah. I had a multi-$1,000 electrical problem one time, and I just thought about that. I'm like, look at my safe electricity, like
Yeah. Would
like
you
the
like to
house.
have a glass of wine and check it
Yeah.
out?
So yeah, I can't sell the house because I upgraded the electricity, but I can't sell it for more money. I wanted to address your podcast, because you mentioned,
Sure.
um, you focus on female guests, and helping women with finance. I don't know if you knew this, but I mean, I was raised by a divorced mom, like,
Oh, I didn't
and
know that.
yeah, and my mom, she was so smart and so driven, and like every dollar counted, and so, I learned so much about budgeting and finance from her. Not ever like intentional lessons, just from watching her do what
Mm-hmm.
she did. And so, as a son, I never questioned what was a male or female role in the house. And the lessons I learned came from my mom. And
Mm-hmm.
then two of my first bosses were women that were just badasses and great at what they did, and so smart and so driven. And I learned so much to help me in my career from women, from my mom, and then from these mentors. And one of them was this one this one lady. The whatever they call them, the intake form, like the data form when you get a new client, uh,
Yeah, client profile.
client profile, whatever it is, whatever, I don't remember what it's called at this company I was working at, but it said on there, client
I know.
spouse.
Yeah, I know.
And she's like, I scratched that out every time and said, you're both clients. And
Hmm.
that sunk in with me. And then me,
That's how traditional the business was. It was the same when I bought it. I was like,
yeah,
I bought this as a 28-year-old female, and the client intake form says basically the man first and then
yes,
their spouse. And I was like, this is terrible.
right. And I was shocked.
And there were
Um,
no husband, no wife,
oh, no,
which I
no, no,
also
no,
had
no.
which I also had a big issue with. So we made our own client forms because I was like, it's client, like
Yes.
doesn't matter.
Yeah. Right. And so, yeah, that was a big thing. And just shifting my mind. And then me, I always wanted to have both spouses there, at
Correct.
least for one meeting a year.
Mm-hmm.
And for when I started 27 years ago, so it was more patriarchal. Like by the end of my
Mm-hmm.
career, you probably see this, especially for people 40 and under. It's just as likely that if there's a man and woman, that the woman's
Woman
the
is, yeah,
is the money person, understands it, has the questions, wants to be in the meetings, wants to,
make
whatever.
decisions. Yeah.
Yeah, but early on, sometimes the if the patriarch, when it was always the decision maker, they'd be like, no, she doesn't need to be here, or the woman
Yeah.
would say, I don't need to be here, and I'd say, I want you here because we're doing all this planning in case one of you
Yeah.
dies, and I don't want you learning about this stuff at the worst time in your life. And they would,
Correct.
it was like shocking. I had never thought about that.
And the
Like,
statistics on a female dying single, like divorced, widowed, is significantly higher than a man
yes,
because of
yes.
this actuarial difference in age, right? So women live longer, and if they get married, often the man is older, and so there's almost, I think the average gap, if you are married, is like 3 to 5 years,
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
right? And
Well,
so statistically speaking, you are going to be managing your money as a female at some point. You don't want to test that out at like 85.
yeah. Well, you don't want to test it out 85. You don't want to test it out if you find yourself divorced. You never
Yes.
know what could happen. So,
You
like,
never know what could happen.
right. So, understanding that is so critical. And then, from any men that are listening, I got input and advice in a female perspective because of my mom and because of my bosses. And if you didn't get that, I think listening to Future Rich podcast would be good for you, so you understand maybe what your spouse or significant other is thinking or concerned about, or just so it just gives you more of an understanding and more likely to have a successful relationship, since so many
Mhm.
relationships end because of financial issues, right?
Yes. And it's surprising to me how few people haven't discussed finances like before they decide to get married, or like, right, it's like kind of a conversation that's been put off
Mm-hmm.
because you've like discussed everything else but not the finances. Like, you want to know, like, do they have debt? Like, how do they feel about money? Like, if they get a bonus, do they want to use it for a vacation? Do they want to use it to pay down the mortgage? Like, how you feel about money and how you treat money and your priorities with it are going to impact your relationship, bar
Absolutely.
none. And if you don't have those conversations in the beginning and you figure it out 10 years in, it just makes for like a contentious relationship, I think.
Oh gosh, yes.
Like, I
It.
just got married, and like the sec on my second date hole, I was like, "So how do you feel about prenups?" I don't even think I knew exactly what his last name was at that time. I was like, it was like Mike from Hinge. I was like, "How do you feel about prenups?" And he was like, "I don't have problems with prenups." And I was like, "Okay, so like you would sign a prenup?" And he was like, "Yeah, of course. Like I would have an issue with a prenup." I was like, "Okay, great." Second date, I was like, "I'm not going to waste my time if you're not going to be comfortable with these conversations
Yeah.
because I got stuff to do." And so if
Right.
you're not cool with it, Mike from Hinge, we're gonna keep it moving.
That's
So
awesome.
we can get another beer now that you're cool with prenups. But like, we also have which is, I really think is really nice. He spends a little bit more than he's like a little bit more lax with money than I am, which I think is good for me because I'm so frugal.
Uh-huh.
But in general, he's like hates having debt. Like, we're on the same, we're like figuring out the honeymoon. I'm like, I think the hotel's too expensive. He's like, I completely agree. It's really nice that we're like we're on the same page. And the areas where he spends, like, he's a little bit more like, yeah, we should go to dinner, like, and celebrate. It's not a big deal. He pushes me a little bit more because I'm such a saver, which I think is good for me. But I find it shocking now that I've experienced it myself that people haven't always had these conversations, or that as a female, maybe they've decided to take a back seat is
Yes.
so important. And it's also so empowering. Like, so I am with my husband because I choose to be, but there is no financial need whatsoever. And there
Yes.
never will be because I've already planned everything out for myself. And he's a great addition, but he's also fine independently. Like, I checked his retirement, like, we did a full retirement plan before
That's
we
amazing.
got engaged. Well, yeah, I was like, so what, how are we doing with the 401k? Where are we with the emergency fund? When's your car going to be paid off? What's the plan for the next car? I did the whole thing
That's awesome. Yeah.
because it is a reason for divorce. And I was like, well, this is something we can just take right off the table.
Yeah. No, that's so smart. And I was listening to I followed this person who's a dating coach advisor on Instagram. I have my Instagram. They have the algorithm has no idea who I am because I follow
Yeah, they're like
Italian stuff and German stuff, and
travel,
yeah,
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 travel, finance,
it's like
coaching. Yeah.
whatever. This guy will look at it, everything. So uh, normally the advice is really solid. It's a woman giving advice to men, but one day she said something like, "Guys, don't ever complain about the price of parking or a burger on a date because it'll give the girl the ick factor and she'll think you're cheap." And I like rarely comment on stuff like that, but I'm like, you know what? I think you should speak your truth. And if you don't
Be who
speak
you
about it,
are.
yeah, if you don't speak about it
Yeah.
now, then that's the expectation. And if they disagree with you that paying $50 for parking is okay and you're not, then you're setting yourself up for problems later. And most relationships end because of financial stuff.
Yeah. I agree with you. So, like, I'm super frugal, and so if I hadn't displayed that in our relationship, and then it comes to find out I want to save 40 to 50% of my income and I'm going to agonize over everything I do, he wouldn't be prepared. Now he's like, it's okay. You can do that. Let's just do it. It's fine. Like, you're doing everything you
Yeah.
want to do. And if I had pretended like spending money is fine with me and I don't
Yeah.
think about it, that's not actually who I am at all. It would be complete deceit, not like super malicious, but like I would be pretending. And I know one of my cousins got married, and her father, my uncle, he's super frugal. I think they call him the Grinch. And but that, I mean, that's fine. I don't think there's anything wrong with that.
No.
And so her husband, she's always like, oh yeah, he's so cheap. But he's always been, and it's actually just kind of like how her father is.
Yeah.
And so it's part of who you are and your relationship with money. And if you hide that aspect of you, I agree with you. I don't think that sets you up for future success in your relationship, because if the person thinks you're like, my sister is more of a spender. She comes on the podcast all the time. Her fake name is Natasha. So if ever I'm having a problem with spending money, I call Natasha. She's like, it's fine, just do it. She like definitely, she's the
She's
complete
the
opposite.
angel on your
Yeah.
wing that tells you it's okay.
Yeah. She's always like, do it. It's great. It's your honeymoon. It's fine. So that's Natasha. And so she's always been that way. So if she kind of hid that from her husband, that would be really shocking to then find out, I think, if you weren't who you really are. So that, I agree with you. I don't think it's an ick factor. I think if the entire date all you did was complain about pricing,
For
nobody
sure.
wants that.
Right.
But if you make certain decisions to impress somebody or hide a part of you in any regard, you're not being true to who you are. And I think with dating and getting to, there's so many people out there, and I think it's better to be who you are up front. And obviously I think they always say like your first or second date's like your resume version of you, the
Yeah.
polished, like, we're not, you know, I don't know. I just decided I was like done with that. That was my personal take, which is why I brought up the prenup thing super early, because some people are like really anti, and I couldn't have someone in my life who's going to be super anti.
Yeah. Well, it's so important whether it's, so I try to talk about, I have to have finance stuff and coaches and therapy, because I think a lot of times if you haven't dug into these things on a personal level for yourself, you're not even prepared to you can't have those conversations with somebody else because you don't understand them yourself. So whether you're a man or woman or whoever you are, like if
Yep.
you need to think about really the life you want to live and how you want to live it so you
Yep.
can be living your truest life, and then have those conversations with people as they come into your life, or they just see it and they either are attracted to it or walk away.
Correct. Because see, I think some of the advice I got with dating was like I needed to tone it down because I was
Right.
like
Yes.
intimidating.
Yeah.
And so my sister and I were talking about this woman we're friends with, and she's like, well, maybe she just like should tone it down. I was like, no, there is no toning it down. She's type A, she's got her shit together,
Yeah.
and that is who she is. And if she tones it down, then and is super chill and laid back and doesn't need a plan,
Yeah.
that's that's not who she is. Like I need to know if there is no plan. Like if the plan is to not have a plan, I need to know it's a no plan day.
You're right.
That's not for everybody.
No.
Like that's not for everybody. And so hiding that from somebody you're dating is to me the same thing with the finances. Like if you're super chill, I'm not. I never
Yeah.
will be. I've decided. And so I think you should just be who you are, whether it's finance or your personality. And yes, you can not dive 100% in the first or second date. You can ease your way in,
Yeah.
but I think hiding who you really are in order, I don't think it ends well long term.
100%. Yeah. So yeah, whether whatever your hobbies are, whatever you're into, yeah. Like
Yeah,
you don't
put
have to
it
throw
out
it out.
there.
Just be you. I've had people tell me, oh, like if you move to this part of town versus that part of town, you'd probably meet more people. Like I don't want to meet more people. I want the people in my life that I want to be in my life, like, and you date someone, if someone is attracted to you because of the car you drive or the house you have or the clothes you wear, if
That
that's
stuff
not who
can
you
all
really
go
are.
away. Yeah, and
Yeah.
that can all go away. Because I'm a big believer, even though I'm in finance, I do say that money comes and goes in periods of your life
Yeah.
because things can happen that you can't predict or can't foresee. And so you yeah, if they're just with you for the car or the money or whatever, what if it all went away? That would be terrible, but it happens to people. There's these unforeseen
100%.
tragedies, and your whole entire life could be totally different.
Yeah, yeah. So, well, this is amazing. So, Barbara's podcast has been featured in the New York Post, Investment News, CNBC, NBC, Yahoo Finance, and more places. Which, congratulations! That's so
Thank
amazing.
you.
Your content's wonderful. Again, look, I hope we've driven that point home that it's important to understand. It's important to have a plan. It's important to have a budget. It's important to have some level of financial literacy so you know who you are and what you want in that aspect of your life to help with your other important relationships in your life and what you're going to teach your kids and on and on and on.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, money is a tool that allows you to achieve all the things that you want in life, and I think understanding that it's a tool and it yields power,
Mm-hmm.
um, I think is really motivating, and once you learn how to use money as a tool,
Mm-hmm.
it's very impactful. It can change the entire trajectory of your life, in my opinion.
Absolutely. Yeah. And if you don't have money and planning or figure out how to make those things happen, you'll never have a chance of getting the things you want to have in your life. So this thing that's so
Absolutely.
important in our lives, yet we don't, you can graduate with a PhD and have never taken a personal finance class. Right. So uh, Barbara, thank you so much for joining me today. I really, really appreciate your time and all the fun stories and advice that you shared with everybody.
Thank you so much for having me. It was wonderful to catch up.
Absolutely. So, and I want to make so if you're on Instagram, you can find Future Rich Podcast at Future Rich Podcast, and from there you can find Barbara's links and all her fun stuff. So, give it a follow, give her a like, and check out some of her hundreds at this point of episodes. So, Barbara, thank you so much. I hope you have a wonderful day and weekend ahead.
Thank you, Carlo.
Okay. Okay, everybody, that's a wrap on my episode with Barbara Ginty. I hope you enjoyed that. That's the first time I had a guest on that was a financial planner. I've kind of taken a break from talking about money and things like that because it was such a big piece of my life for so long. I frankly was just a little bit burned out on it. So I know I've hit on little things here and there, but I wanted to dive into the thoughts of an expert on that here, like I've done with coaches and psychologists and therapists and all kinds of experts. So I hope that was helpful. We talked about how important it is, obviously, to have an understanding of money and have a financial plan in order to do, have, and be the things you want in life, but how also it's important to have a clear idea of your thoughts and philosophies of money in terms of your key relationships in your life. And if you're not clear on that and you aren't able to talk about it and articulate it, like I said, 50% of divorces end just because of money, and people have such a hard time talking about money with anyone. So get comfortable with it. And Barbara's podcast is a great way to do that, to listen to conversations, listen to her talk with her guests, listen to her talk with people about planning and budgeting and goal setting and getting into the real weeds of financial planning and spreadsheets and budgets, so that you maybe have a better comfort level when you need to start doing it yourself, and you won't have maybe heard it for the first time, or you'll get a better understanding, or even know what questions that you might be needing to think about or needing to ask when you sit down with an expert. So check that out. And I hope that was so helpful for you. Give her podcast a like and follow. If you like what I'm doing, give me a like and a follow. Give me a like and follow. It's obviously always helpful to do a review for podcasts. So please do that for Future Rich and It's the Journey. And that's it. I hope you're having a wonderful day, that you learned something today to help you along your way, and that you enjoy your journey. Thank you so much.